is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Some tribal members are now getting additional CARES Act money to help them during this pandemic shutdown. The Pyramid Lake Tribe in Nevada and the Lummi Nation in Washington will disperse a portion of their CARES Act funding to eligible members. $8 billion was set aside for tribes in the act. The Paiute Tribal Council decided to distribute 3 payments of $2,000 to every eligible member 18 years and older. The Paiute Tribe will distribute the first check by May 29th, with the next checks coming in August and December. The Lummi Nation is giving one payment of $1,800 to enrolled members. Lummi Nation Treasurer Kathy Pierre says the spread of the coronavirus has been financially overwhelming to tribal members. Lummi Nation is still working on a process to distribute the funds. Public schools, cultural and recreational institutions in California are now being encouraged to acknowledge the traditional homelands of tribes there. Assembly Bill 1968, the Tribal Land Acknowledgement Act of 2021, was introduced in January by James Ramos, the only Native American in California's state legislature. Last week, the Assembly Committee on Arts, Entertainment, Sports, Tourism, and Internet Media approved the measure by consent. Ramos says this is one way to educate people on current and historical Native American affairs. He says cultural institutions have a duty to represent accurate historical information. Land acknowledgements could appear in printed statements, plaques, website, and social media. Land acknowledgements are common at tribal events and even at the Oscars. Maori director Taika Waititi offered a land acknowledgement at the Oscars last year. Now for the latest numbers of positive COVID-19 cases in Indian Country, let's go to Jordan Bennett-Begay, our Washington editor. Jordan?
Yate Patty, Yate Shikis Do Shidane'em. As of this morning, the Indian health system has a total of 5,626 positive confirmed cases and 174 deaths. Again, that is a total of 5,626 positive confirmed cases and 174 deaths as of this morning. Patty, on Friday, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation in North Dakota saw their cases double. They reported 35 new cases, giving the nation a total of 70 positive confirmed cases. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians in Mississippi reported 47 new cases. They now have a total of 293 cases. In Arizona, the White Mountain Apache tribe has 113 new cases, and this gives the nation a total of 414 cases total. And the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma reported 5 additional cases. And for the Navajo Nation, tribal officials reported 370 new cases and 13 deaths from Friday to Sunday. And the nation also had its strictest lockdown yet. Grocery stores and gas stations were closed, and essential workers were ordered to stay home. And approximately 544 individuals have recovered from the virus.
Well, that's good news on the recovery side. I know also last week we interviewed the chairman of the Hopi tribe, Timothy Navangyoma, and he said that the tribe is starting to go village to village to do testing of everyone. So, you know, we can see the number of positive cases going up once more people get tested. He also was concerned about people who test negative, because he said that could give them a sense of false security, thinking they can go around and almost, you know, be immune to it. But we know that's not the case. So as we cover these numbers in Indian Country, that concern of, you know, if you may test negative today, that doesn't mean you can't get it tomorrow.
Yes, no, that's definitely right. And also, you know, the Food and Drug Administration released last week that from the early data that they received, that there could be false negatives. So people could be warned that maybe they tested negative for it, but they could have it, and they're still investigating that right now.
And then as we see states opening up, what does that mean to tribal people who may want to go out and eat at a restaurant or go shopping? So we're keeping an eye on all of this, and we continue to monitor the numbers in Indian Country. So that includes a lot of data gathering. So Jordan Bennett-Begay, thank you so much.
Yeah, Patty.
And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
Welcome back. Before European contact, several American Indian tribes lived in what is now the state of Illinois. Among them were the Illinois, Miami, Winnebago, Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes. Today, there is not a single federally recognized tribe in the state. However, there is a large population of American Indians living in Chicago and the state due to government policies that relocated Indian people into the city in the 1950s. So many that in 1953, the American Indian Center of Chicago was founded and became the first urban Indian center in the country. Joining us today is Heather Miller. She's the executive director of the American Indian Center of Chicago. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, Patty. Thanks so much for having me today.
Well, we're very pleased that you're here with us to talk a little bit about this unique situation that the urban population in Chicago faces. You're kind of on your own without a single tribal government in the state to help advocate for support at a government level. How do you manage that without direct tribal support?
Being here in Chicago is a really unique situation for us as Native people. As you said, we really don't have that tribal support. So we rely quite frequently on our relationships with our tribal nations across the border in Illinois. So we're great partners with the Ho-Chunk Nation. We are wonderful partners with our friends at the Potawatomi nations. Many of the different bands join and support our work. We work really closely with several bands of the Ojibwe tribes that are also located in the area. We try to make sure that we maintain really positive relationships with all the tribes that we tend to serve here in the city. Just here at the Indian Center, we serve about 100 different tribal nations. So that means we really have to know a wide variety of traditions and stories and cultural pieces, just so that way we can relate to all of our very beautiful and wide, diverse membership.
Wow, that's 100 different tribes there. And how do you reach the state government of Illinois and also even city council in Chicago?
It's quite a fight. We're constantly struggling to make sure that the city knows that we still live here. We have the 6th largest urban Indian population in the country. We actually have the largest in the Midwest. So with those statistics, you would think that our government officials would want to take a bigger relationship piece of working with our tribes and with our Indian people here in the state, but they really don't. So we constantly are advocating and working with government officials. Recently, well, prior to the pandemic, we were working on a citywide campaign to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. So those are the types of advocacy work that we're able to work on here in Chicago, because those are issues that tend to affect all of us, even though we come from such a wide variety of backgrounds and perspectives. So some of those larger issues are things that we can all advocate on and work together to make positive change. So with the COVID, we've really come together to step up and just make sure that no matter where we come from or what our tribal nation is, we're all working together to make sure that we take care of all of our Indian folks here in the city.
How is the pandemic making the urban Indian community there visible?
Well, so far, we're actually having some major problems with that. We have a group called the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative here in Chicago. So that is an advocacy group with all 17 of our Native serving organizations here in the city. And so we come together and we compare research that is happening. We compare information that the city is putting out, because we all tend to get different pieces based on the areas that we work in. And so one of the things that we've been seeing is that the state itself is doing a really good job of making sure that they recognize Indian people in their statistics. So when they put out information around the impact of the COVID on our different communities, we see ourselves represented in those numbers. But when we look at what the city is doing, the city itself is actually othering us. So we're not being represented in any category other than other. And so we're not being visible on these statistics. And so with my friends that I have in the mayor's office and with our folks that we've constantly been educating about, I am nonstop with my texts and emails, just reminding them that, hey, we still exist. We haven't gone anywhere, guys. And so being othered in your statistics during this massive pandemic is actually causing us more harm than they think. And so we're trying to work really closely with our government, with our local city officials right now to change those statistics to make sure that our Native population is seen and heard during this really interesting time right now in our city.
That's amazing to hear, this idea that you're being othered in this pandemic. I thought those boxes were long gone. You know, you had races to check off, and then American Indians always fell into that other box. But that still exists in Chicago, and probably because there are no federally recognized tribes in the state. Do you think that's part of the problem?
That's absolutely part of the problem, Patty. And this is not just a pandemic related issue. We've actually been working on this as an organization for years now, because one of the things that prior to the pandemic and even still now, our center focused on working with victims of trafficking. We have a major trafficking problem here in Chicago. And what we found with our work with the court systems and with the legal system, with even police out on the streets, is that they're not asking the right questions even when they arrest individuals. So our community, prior to this, was even being othered through these different systems in place. So things that should be taken into consideration, that there are Native people still living here, those systems were failing prior to the pandemic. So it really has given us a larger sense of just how much the city tends to ignore us and just leave us out on all of these issues. So despite the fact that our communities are struggling economically, we're seeing decreased resources going to our communities, we're also now fighting with our local government officials just to make sure that we're still heard and that we're still recognized.
Do you find it ironic that you're in this situation when Chicago was picked as one of the relocation cities, and that was a federal government policy to relocate American Indians into cities like Chicago, and yet today you're struggling with any kind of program funding of its kind because there, again, are no federally recognized tribes in the state?
That is exactly what it is. And so without having the federally recognized tribes here in the state, that then leaves our city officials and even regular community members without a basic understanding of tribal history and tribal sovereignty. And so when it comes to thinking about how our treaty relationships should be considered in urban governments even, our folks aren't thinking about that because they don't have any experience with it. They don't have the background. They don't have the education. They don't have the knowledge or the information needed to make choices and to make decisions that truly account for our Native people here in Chicago. And so it's mind-numbingly frustrating. And it feels so hypocritical too, because when we look at the history of this land, and specifically the Great Lakes region, this was such a popular place for so many tribes. This has always been a city, as we like to say, because so many of our tribal nations were coming here to trade and to build relationships with one another. And so when we leave out that history and when we don't talk about that connection to this particular place, it really feels like we're doing a disservice to the land in general and to the city. Really cool city, and we should be happy that we're here.
Heather, let's put all of that aside and let's look at what you are providing to the Native Americans and Alaska Native people living in Chicago during this pandemic. What have you provided for them?
When the pandemic hit, it really put us in a little bit of a crisis for a minute, because the major point of our work is to bring our community together face to face. So we thought, okay, well, how do we do that given the fact that we got to do this virtually now? One of the things that we focused on was first our education program. We do a lot of land-based education because that can connect the fact that we're from 100 different tribes and we all have respect for our plant and animal relatives. So in the last couple of weeks, we put together seed starter kits. So our community can plant together, they can grow their plants. We're providing folks with vegetables and herbs that they can easily grow in apartments that don't require too much work, but that will provide a nice activity and will be able to offer some new things for the food that they have to cook now, being at home all by themselves. We have also been able to collect photo or art from our Native artists. We've seen a lot of our Native artists make their art available for free. So we put together a coloring book that we were able to send out to 50 families with colored pencils, so that way their kids would have some activities to connect them and to learn a little bit more about some of our Native artists. We have been doing some online talking circles with our community. We've been hosting a bi-weekly, or no, twice a month, men's talking circle for our men and for our men veterans, just to keep them connected through this time.
How is that working out to take a talking circle online? I can't imagine how different that must feel, because when you're in that circle, there's that camaraderie and you can see the person next to you. How is that working out online?
So I've not attended because it is specifically for our men, but what I've heard is that it's actually going really well. Folks are still able to share and to connect. Of course, we can't do the physical contact piece that I think is so needed with these circles, but it's still allowing people to express themselves and to be vulnerable to a certain extent in a safe space. We have been able to keep them closed and specific to our community, so that way we've not had any kind of distraction or Zoom bombs, I guess is what they are now.
Right.
So we've been able to make it safe. So at least that part has been okay with this transition. But of course, it's different and unique.
Right. You've also provided traditional herbs, sweetgrass and things like that for people.
We have. So one of the things that was an immediate need for many of our families was food. So we started doing food distribution in partnership with all of our Native serving organizations here in the city. Able to also slip in a bag of tobacco, slip in some sage, slip in a little sweetgrass, so that way our elders and our community are able to get those needed medicines that we can offer and that are special to us and that they can't get in other places or other stores that they could be going to.
Right. And are you seeing a shift in elders moving back to their reservations in this pandemic? Is that a concern of these elders leaving the city?
About the time that everything started shutting down, we had a few folks that we noticed were fleeing back to their reservations and were leaving. But it seems like at this point, most everybody is sheltered in place in the city. With our community, we've been here for so long now that Chicago is home. Not only are we members of our own tribal nations, but we're also members of the Chicago American Indian community. That's very special and unique to us. So we're loud and proud city Indians, and we love that designation.
Well, and there's so much going on outside of the pandemic. I know you guys have been working on a campaign to get people to fill out the census. Has that continued on?
Yeah, so again, those food boxes just become a really great way to still do some of our pre-pandemic programming. So we are in partnership also with the National Urban Indian Family Coalition on our census work. So we're able to partner with all the urban Indian centers across the country on our Get Out the Vote efforts and our census work. So we've been able to sneak some census information into those food boxes that we're distributing out to the community. And later this week, we're actually going to do an online Zoom fill out your census workshop. So for folks that have questions or are concerned about what's being asked of them, we'll be there to provide that explanation and to offer some support and resources for folks.
Wow. So again, everything moving online to different platforms to communicate, to continue to communicate. And what about your campaign to have an Indigenous Peoples Day recognized there in Illinois? Is that continuing?
We've put a little bit of a pause on the campaign right now, just because our attention is really focused on the immediate needs of our community. And so when we have key folks working on more relief efforts and mutual aid efforts, we thought that that was a much more important piece of our work right now. And we'd leave the campaign on the back burner for just a little bit. So many of our key supporters and individuals are really turning their efforts to mutual aid and trying to find ways to help connect folks with just ways to meet their needs, that we felt like it'd be a little bit disrespectful to keep the campaign going. And we really did want to focus on meeting people's needs first.
Right. So you are getting the census information out. And what about your Get Out to Vote campaign? Are you also using those food box distribution points to connect with people, to get them to either register or remind them to vote?
Yeah, what we found was that we participated in Get Out the Vote efforts last year as well. So the majority of our community has been registered. We'll still voter registration, but we know like the majority of our supporters are 100% engaged, ready to go, ready for the election, are super excited to vote out 46. So we continue to put out messages around the importance of Natives showing up to the polls.
Well, so there's so much to think about in this, despite this pandemic happening, you know, life continues to go on. So how do we deal with that? Before we leave, what's the one thing that you really want people to know about the American Indian Center of Chicago and the people you serve?
Chicago is a really important place when it comes to our urban Native history and thinking about what it looks like to support urban Indians. And so one of the things that I think it's important for us to remember is that even though we're not necessarily on our traditional homelands, we're in another place, this is still Indian land. We still have major issues that our community faces. And it's important to stand up for our urban community just as much as it is to stand up for our reservation community. So we always ask that you constantly keep us in mind. We're always looking for donations to continue to support our community and to support our people here in the city. You can find more information about all the work that we're doing on our website, aicchicago.org, and know that even though the center has only been here for the last 70 years, we fully intend to go through this pandemic and be able to survive another 70 plus years to support this amazing community that we have here in Chicago.
Well, very good. Well, Heather Miller, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, the Executive Director of the American Indian Center in Chicago. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you for watching Indian Country Today. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
This is Indian Country Today.